I would like to share first time blooming orchids of 2024, all the while also give you an idea as to how long it can take for different orchids to actually grow into blooming size orchids, no matter what the seller says. For example, you may buy a near blooming size orchid, and usually we assimilate that with 2 or 3 years of care before we see our supposed near blooming size orchid bloom. That is at best. However, the reality can be totally different. Also, know that while we care for an orchid to grow into a blooming size one, there are environmental factors that, if we do not get them right straight away, they can impede on how long a near blooming size orchid will take to bloom. Also, how long will it take for us to figure out why our orchid is not blooming? Then we act on the observations and make the necessary changes, which can take another 12 months growing cycle to test out. In the commentary of these first time bloomers, you will hear different factors of why some orchids took so long to bloom, and I hope that it helps you to analyze or break down at which stage your supposed near blooming size orchid is at. Was it even near blooming size when you bought it? Maybe the seller was exaggerating a little bit, or if you have just gotten new orchids into your collection that are near blooming size, then here's a little reality check of what you may be in for in the year or years ahead. Now this is actually like a PS, but I'm going to put it here. Anyway, know that if your near blooming size orchid blooms for you within the first year of your care, then that is great news and it will change her status to blooming size. However, what can happen is that following her first year blooming with you, she may skip a year or two, and then there are several reasons for that. So first of all, she bloomed for you so soon because she came to you still filled with the ideal growing conditions in her system, which triggered her to bloom for you straight away. So shipping, etc. did not affect her. Still, it makes your near blooming size orchid blooming size. If she then skips the following year or years, then that is her having undergone a period of acclimating, which she did not do straight away because she bloomed based on the conditions she came from, but after blooming, she had to adapt to her new environment. Thirdly, if she doesn't bloom for the second year in a row for you, then you may need to ensure adequate light is provided. You see, even in lower light levels, an orchid will grow well, but it is not enough to provide the orchid with enough energy to bloom. So there are a plethora of other reasons why a new orchid that initially bloomed without any issues will not bloom for several years after purchasing it. And if you would like more information about that, then I'm happy to answer any questions on your specific case in the comments. Please do not forget to hit the thumbs up for me. I would really appreciate that support, as well as subscribe to the channel for a whole gaggle of orchid content, past and in the future, so thank you so much for that. Right, this orchid, Cattleya Astraea, came into the collection in 2020, and she came as a near blooming size. I actually like to call those kinds of orchids juveniles, less words there, and our two-legged juveniles have their tantrums, which we as parents have to navigate and deal with to create a harmonious atmosphere. So, my Astraea was a juvenile, and while she did not give me any problems with tantrums, even though she is a bifoliate, and then the alarm bells ring like Diva Attributes et al., not with this one. She took to the semi-hydro setup without any issues, but it still took her 4 years to bloom, despite growing 3 and in 1 year up to 7 new growths. So, bigger is not the problem. She just took her sweet time to get her grow on, and many times orchids need to establish a significant root system to support the energy uptake and expenditure a blooming requires. As this orchid was a gift from a very special person, I am overjoyed that she is finally a blooming size orchid. The next one that bloomed for us for the first time is the Brassavola tuberculata. She was the last of my Brassavola species to bloom, and finally I could untangle the ID mess that I had created when all my Brassavola species came into the collection in 2018. They all look pretty much the same. It has taken her 6 years to bloom for the first time, and she was bought as a juvenile. However, it was wrong culture that had to be corrected in order for this orchid to finally bloom. I had no idea that her growths would get as long as they do, even though when she first arrived, she did have a nice new leaf. In her case, it was wrong culture, and the fact that she actually survived the abuse, having been decimated down to a rhizome with only 2 growths or so trying to revive the orchid, this borders on a miracle. Anyway, 6 years later, I got us one bloom to show for. That was huge for this orchid and for the collection. So let's see what 2025 brings, because she appears to be growing as if she has some major catching up to do now. Cattleya iricolor. Mercy! I almost fainted on the east side of the patio when I saw this orchid had her first sheath, and there were buds in there. This is how she arrived in September of 2018. I used these pots for my Rapiculus Laelias, the miniatures, and in December of the same year I had a change of heart and potted her up in a 15cm self-watering pot, and then the wait was on. Back then, I was able to use heat mats. So if you are familiar with my channel, you know that since 2020, I have stopped using heat mats. Luckily, this orchid had nice warm feet for the first 2 years in the collection during the winter, because she needed more than 2 years to get established. Her first new growth only started growing a full year after she arrived in the collection. And that new growth took a whole 12 months to mature. The acclimating process of this orchid was excruciating, to say the least. However, in the past 2 years, her growths appear to be speeding up as they mature, and here we are in June of 2024 with the most astounding, long-lasting blooms of my iricolor, the first ones. While she was in bloom, she started on her next new growth. So, while very slow out of the gates, it would appear that this orchid is not such a slow grower after all. This is a classic example of getting to know an orchid and how many years it can take to actually analyze and understand our juveniles. Then, sometimes we get 2 orchids in a pot when they come as juveniles. Not always is it that obvious to tell from the get-go, but in the case with my Laelia Pacavia, one piece had already been blooming size for 2 years straight, while the second piece only grew to blooming size in June of 2024. As the 2 pieces were in the same pot, and I did not see that there were 2 when I potted her up in leca and self-watering for the first and second time, I thought I had a blooming size Pacavia 2 years ago, until I repotted her again and discovered there was in actual fact a second piece, which had as yet to bloom. So you can also get that scenario. Same culture, same repot schedule, same acclimating period, same shipment. Everything is same, and still one piece will bloom while the other is just not having it for several years afterwards. I'm super pleased with the progress of my now 2 blooming size Pacavias. My colnagoi arrived in the collection in 2021, I believe. I do not have any image of her in my database of her in her nursery pot, but I will link a video in the description for you where I did the unboxing. Needless to say, she was in great condition. I can show you how she grew 1 new growth every year, and then early in 2024 she bloomed for the first time, which was a dud blooming, so in order to not fudge the facts here, this is her second blooming, but I consider her first for the patio because the first spike did have 2 buds. One was taken out by a bird and the other bud self-pollinated. So we did not get to see her blooms. And this footage also does not do her justice. This is her second spike within the same year in 2024 on a new growth that just grew so fast with a second spike, she was anxious to prove her point. Anyway, the footage of these blooms does not do her justice at all. I was just anxious to get some images despite the conditions, seeing as I had some trust issues with the first blooming that happened, and I had no idea how long the blooms would last. Every time a Rapiculus Laelia comes into bloom for the first time, it's cartwheels around the patio. This one was no exception. Oh, and if you would like to know her bloom duration, it is over 6 weeks. So for the next go around, I shall wait for calmer days in order to document the amazing colors and markings of this colnagoi and hope to have more images that are in focus. A massive surprise for a first-time bloomer is my Cattleya bicolor. Wow! Mind blown. This one surprised me. It was so nice to see a bud forming. No sheath, a bud. Crazy moment on the patio. Let me tell you, that bud was protected to such a degree, short of having an armed guard stand under the portico 24/7. I did everything I could to get this one to bloom out. She arrived on the patio in July of 2021, and after getting her to settle in with CalMag, etc., I potted her later that same month. And here we are. This orchid, along with the iricolor, was a huge yay moment on the patio. And for her first bloom, she lasted over 6 weeks. She had to deal with wind and rain and all that stuff that would normally take a bloom out prematurely, but I decided to put that bloom through her paces just to see how resilient or how fussy she's going to be for the future, and trust. She stood the test beautifully. And what I love about this bloom, she is also the first bloom that I have, which has hues of rose gold in her. Just so happens to be my daughter's favorite color. Love, love, love. Now, I did not take separate footage of the second piece of my Catyclia atrowalker, which came into bloom for the first time, but it's pretty obvious that the one on the left is the first time bloomer. Here's another example of the same orchid that came as a double in a pot, where one piece was a first time bloomer 2 years ago, and then here we are with the second piece maturing into a blooming sized orchid, despite everything being exactly the same, just making her debut with a single bloom. This is a wonderful small to medium size, well, somewhat medium-sized orchid with astoundingly large blooms that are a bit of an exaggeration for the size of the actual orchid. Just fantastic. And finally, but not for this video, but finally, my Cattleya tenebrosa came into bloom for the first time as well. Year after year, blind sheath after blind sheath. Finally, 2024 was the year she pulled through and surprisingly just made it to bloom in October. I mean, that was like scooching in at the last minute because it is super late for a tenebrosa. I was concerned at the beginning of the summer already because she had not even started a new growth by then, which was out of the norm. But then she did, and then she had to hustle to make it before the temperatures got too low, which would have caused bud blast for sure. Still, she made it. She looked a little crooked and out of sorts, but this is a huge milestone for this orchid, which also arrived in my collection in 2018. She needed a lot of acclimating time, and I had to understand her light level requirements as well. Now that she has her place on the east side, where she gets blasted with light, I am interested to see if this bloom was a stress bloom, seeing as 2024 was the weirdest weather behavior since the orchids arrived on the patio. Or if 2025 will show us tenebrosa blooms that are not all out of sorts and that bloom in a timely manner. Vamos a ver. Only time will tell. Should I say finally again? Yes, because that would apply to this Epidendrum, pseudo-Epidendrum crossed with Melanoporphyrium. Finally, this orchid bloomed on the patio after it arrived, also in 2018. The checklist for getting this orchid to bloom at last is extensive. And yes, it was bought as a juvenile, but I had the wrong light levels. Oh, and you can see what I expected from this orchid early days with the length of the stake I put in initially. I was not wrong, because their growth can get that large. However, my climate and this orchid are at war with each other. So getting the light levels right without burning the leaves was a challenge. Once the light levels were dialed in, the low humidity burns the leaves, causing them to drop prematurely. Ergo, no energy for the orchid. Then the fertilizer levels were all wrong as well. Turns out more calcium than anything else was needed, which we took care of. It took years to figure this orchid out, and while I believe I have her figured out now, you can see that the leaves are not happy, and they will never be because I don't have high humidity, and in the winter it is far too cold for her, so we're always gonna have raggedy looking leaves, premature leaf drop, etc. However, to have this one bloom, it was a fist pump moment for me. While all these years of care and troubleshooting were worth it because it became a personal vendetta for me to get this orchid to bloom, I'm not that impressed with the blooms to say woohoo, I love them. It is more that I was not going to fold like a lawn chair with this orchid until thought she bloomed. The order this orchid came with was so pathetic. This blooming achievement, well, it became personal. But I do love that blood orange flare on the lip. I really, really do. I wish there was more of that structure with a larger surface area in order to admire it, because really it is the most striking part of the bloom. But having orchids that have foliage that look as if the plant is going to the compost, I'm not sure that I'm thrilled about continuing to grow this orchid. Once again though, time will tell. And for now she can stay, and I'm just chuffed to have gotten her to this point. If you can visualize me blowing on my nails and rubbing my chest with them just to polish them a little bit. Yes, that. Speaking of finally and time and all of that, it is that time when I say I hope that you will be around for what comes next, and I look forward to sharing that with you when it comes to these and other orchids, also the why and the why not of whatever comes next. Thank you so much for your time watching this video. I hope you could pick up some nuggets of intel for your juveniles along the way while seeing some blooms, which I think were rather beautiful, if I may say so myself. Know that your time is appreciated, and I wish you the most wonderful of days, on the condition, though please, that you stay safe. Take care. Bye.